Welcome to this month's edition of TouchPoint What's the Point, where we're going to talk about TouchPoint Giving. So, Eric, thank you for starting us off on a comedic foot, even if it has a hole in one. That was good. So, and by the way, I didn't even practice that one. My name is Michael Faulkner, and as you can see, joining me is Eric Smith. We can probably go ahead and move to the next slide. There we go.
There we go.
That's me, a little more clean shaven and a little leaner, but we won't talk about that. And again, joining me is Eric Smith. Eric is in charge of our giving solutions, which we're going to be talking about today. But speaking of, let's just kind of take a look at the agenda. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at it overall, just what does giving look like at your church and what makes giving happen? What holds giving back from happening? And then we'll talk about how can you use giving for addressing ministry needs. I know that sounds like an obvious statement, but there's some best practices around different things that may not be as readily obvious. And then I know a lot of you have questions around the giving payment processor that TouchPoint now offers. So Eric will be diving into that. I'm actually going to provide a little bit of an update on that right off the bat before we even get started. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. In fact, let's just jump ahead. So as many of you know, for really recent history, TouchPoint has had millions of dollars in giving come through our payment platform, and it has been processed by the payment processor of your choice. We never took any fees on that and always hoped that that would represent savings to the partner churches that they would then be able to use for ministry. And what we found was you're still paying the same amount. It's not really much benefit, and the payment processor in most cases was keeping the total amount. Now, there are some exceptions. Many of you are on one of our payment processors that is as inexpensive as it gets, and no one's going to be able to compete with that. But as a general rule, we found that the benefit we were hoping our partner churches would gain was limited. So we found an opportunity when we partnered with Give to change all of that. So if we go to the next slide, we just rolled out in October TouchPoint Giving, and it's a combination of TouchPoint from a CHMS standpoint and Give. It isn't an integration. We actually rebuilt the platform together, so it is part of the TouchPoint platform. However, no one has to use the TouchPoint Giving offering. It's just there if you want to use it. Just like always, you have choices. Now you just have one more choice. But at the end of the day, our heart for trying to provide savings was being able to be fulfilled this way, because now the monthly fees that you're paying with most processors is completely eliminated if you're using TouchPoint Giving. And then the normal transaction fees, of course, would be very competitive, but that is where we're able to really provide some savings to our partner churches. So that's just kind of where we are. Again, Eric's going to talk a little bit more detail about that. But before we do, we really just want to kind of take a peek at, again, best practices around giving. What are perhaps, and Eric right now is going to talk a little bit about perhaps what your perceived giving versus what your actual giving is. When he does that, then I will talk a little bit about some best practices. So with that, Eric, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm going to start by just taking a little bit of a step backwards, as Michael had mentioned about Give and TouchPoint partnering together. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my background actually comes from the Give side. So I've been able to just spend several years working with churches on their online giving and generosity platforms. The benefit of us coming together and having this as one solution for our TouchPoint clients as TouchPoint Giving is really bringing in some of the best practices that we've learned over the years from Give. And I want to just kind of share this graphic because this is kind of the roots of where Give had started, the reason that we became a company in the first place. For those of you who have not had any history with Give, we actually started out of a church called 242 Community based out of Brighton, Michigan. And the whole purpose was really driven by wanting to have better tools to encourage generosity, taking next steps with giving, and just having the appropriate resources to make that happen. So this graphic, this is fairly straightforward. My guess would be that most on this call have some sort of tool that is getting you this data, which is giving you a snapshot as to what your current giving situation looks like at the church, right? You have it broken down between your one-time donors, your recurring donors, and your offline donors. If we get more specific, yes, we might be able to get into stock donations, cryptocurrency now, but at least from a high level, my guess would be that you have this information. But when we take a look at this and we take it a step further, a more accurate view looking at the donor situation is actually looking at those who give and actually kind of comparing that with those who aren't giving to the church. Now, you may be looking at this number of 65% and thinking, that's a pretty big number of those who aren't giving. Well, interestingly enough, and you may have actually seen this data. It's been floating around actually for the past few years. There was organizations that actually pulled this data based off of evangelical churches across the country to figure out what percentage of those that are attending the church aren't actually giving. And the reality is it's a really large number. There's a lot more of those individuals who may be attending who actually have never actually taken that first step of donating. And so that question then just begs a little bit of an analysis to say, well, what do we do about it? Is there something that can be done about it? And so that's really where Give kind of came in, was really this idea of let's talk about providing easier pathways for those who are currently not giving to the church to take that first step. Now, when we talk about the 80-20 rule, there's been books written about this, more actually specifically focused on volunteering. And I would vouch to say that for most churches in this room, this is probably fairly accurate, right? You have 20% of those who are attending the church that are doing 80% of the work, whether that be volunteering or actually even giving. So generosity is not actually that different from those volunteer statistics. And so when we look at those that haven't taken that first step, we need to realize that stewardship does not start with radical giving. In fact, when somebody dips their toes in the water, if you will, to give for the first time, it may be a small gift. It's a journey that people are walking through before they get to the point where they're, giving an actual 10% tithe, or they're becoming a recurring donor. And what we've found is that often those that aren't giving, it's not that they don't desire to give. It's not that they are refusing to take that step, but more the reality is that they don't feel like they have good tools to get started. There may be fear that they don't have enough money. There may be fear that, that when you talk about the tithe and 10%, that sounds like a lot, and I don't really know where to begin. And so when we start with that structure without providing a compelling reason to donate, sometimes people just won't take that step. And I talk with pastors, and I think it's fairly common that, if that discussion hasn't happened, if there hasn't been education around it, then there's not necessarily that great opportunity for someone to take that first step. And so we want to be able to just talk through, how to do that. And because the reality is, not just first-time donors, all of your donors, they don't want to just give to your church, right? They want to give through your church. They want to know that the money that is funneling through the church is being used for meaningful things, whether that's missions, whether that's local community outreach. We all realize that there's realities of paying staff budget. There's realities of building costs that come into play, but most donors really want to also know what else is going on in the community. So at the core, when we get down to the nuts and bolts of it, we know it all starts with trust, and it all starts with relationships.
Sorry, it doesn't help when I'm on mute. It kind of makes it hard to make a point. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And you bring up a really good point. The common saying, the currency of relationship is trust and communication. And one of the challenges is, how do we take a biblical approach to try to encourage giving, when it's when scripture tells us that the right hand shouldn't know what the left hand is doing, and that centers around a pride issue, right? But you also want to be sure that your pastors aren't what's the word I'm looking at? We're not introducing pressure to pastors as it relates to their congregants based on that giving. So you want to be sure that information is quiet. So then how do you go about encouraging giving? And at the end of the day, it really is about making sure that the congregation is engaged in why this is necessary. How is their gift making a difference? So there are a couple of things you're going to see here in just a moment. A few statistics that I think are pretty compelling. One is around first-time givers and how often they do a repeat gift, and it's really quite surprising how few will repeat that gift, but then that number spikes on the second time around. So what do we do about it? Well, being able to communicate to those people something just very simple that doesn't really talk specifically, but hey, we just wanted to acknowledge that you are engaging in the church through giving, and that matters, and it's impacting lives for Jesus Christ. That kind of thing motivates somebody to want to give again, right? Another way that giving can be increased in churches is, oddly, it's by making sure your members are engaged in small groups, whether that's Sunday school or a home team. There is a strong correlation between being in a small group and giving, especially when you have small group leaders being willing to convey the message about how important it is to give, because now you have someone who doesn't have an ulterior motive, or at least a perceived, that's a better way to say it, a perceived ulterior motive in trying to push that message. Instead, they're just trying to share what the gospel says, or excuse me, what the Bible says. Really wrestling with specifics in my words today. What the Bible says about giving. So when you have the pastor say it from the stage, sometimes that guard can go up, right? Because of the perception of maybe an ulterior motive. But when you have a life group leader saying it, now all of a sudden it's something we're willing to listen to. Also, you have, special gift contact. You have individuals that might make a huge gift. And again, just having a way to acknowledge what they're doing without calling out the specifics around it. Maybe having a pastor or an associate pastor say, hey, I just want you to know, I'm aware that you have a very generous heart and that you are enabling and equipping ministry through your generosity. And I just want to say thank you. I don't know what it is, how much it is, but I just want you to know these are the things we're doing as a church, and you're impacting that. That kind of stuff can be encouraging. One of the important things, though, to acknowledge is when you see a lapse of giving, what we hear from many of our churches is that's usually a precursor to someone beginning to disengage from their church. And it may not be your fault. So being able to reach out to that individual, you don't have to say, hey, I noticed you stopped giving, but just, hey, Eric, you're on my mind, and I just wanted to check in, see how everything's going. And maybe Eric says, gosh, I lost my job 2 weeks ago. Eric, don't worry, that's just an example. I lost my job 2 weeks ago, and I could really use some prayer. Well, now all of a sudden you at least have an explanation for the lapse of giving, and now we can really start loving and supporting him, and he hopefully does not disengage from the church. And then finally, you have, radical and legacy type giving, if you will. This is a kind of a strategy that a lot of churches put in place, where they say, hey, to the biggest donors, hey, there are certain pathways that your funds can go down, and ministries that they can impact. And here is what we are hoping to do through those funds, through these, let's call it 3 different types of ministries. Again, it really makes people feel more bought in and more inclined to want to give, because they see the tangible results of what they're accomplishing. And then on the next slide, this actually goes back to the first point I was making around first-time and second-time givers. Again, it's not terribly common to reach out to a first-time giver, but when you look at these statistics and see that only 13% of first-time givers go on to become a consistent giver, there's a lot of ministry opportunity being missed there. So being able to just encourage them and acknowledge them, and just say, hey, here are the things we're doing, and I just want to thank you because we know that you're contributing. Don't mention a dollar amount, but we know you're contributing, and you are impacting people for Christ by being generous. Thank you so much. That in and of itself motivates people to want to continue that process. And as you can see, once they jump in the second time, all of a sudden the odds of them continuing to give spike. It's a 5-fold increase right there. So again, we're not trying to pat people on the back and say, look at you, Johnny, great job. You're a giver. We're so proud of you. But being able to make them feel bought into that process, like they realize that they are truly making an impact, so that they want to continue to do it. Because ultimately, that's what it's all about. It's about it's about equipping ministry. And without the funds, the ministry can't be equipped. So at the end of the day, we just want to encourage them toward those goals.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Michael, for providing a little bit more context there around just how to encourage generosity. And what we want to kind of transition to now is just talking a little bit more about the why and the feedback that we have gotten over the years at Give, and even more recently as TouchPoint Giving has launched. It's been very similar feedback from our church partners on why, right? What are we looking for? What are the ministerial needs that are being accomplished with tools like this? And so as we dive in, let's talk about, one of the things that's I'm sure on everyone's mind, which is the reality of fees. We can't get around them. Their fees are in existence when we deal with online giving versus offline giving. But the churches have expressed to us they want to avoid high processing costs. And, we do see that there is a pretty wide range from provider to provider, but we do get feedback that some providers are continuing to increase those fees, and that's been a challenge for some of our churches. There's been extra fees or a lot of different fees that are kind of tough to understand where they're coming from, whether it's from multiple statements or monthly software costs. There's different ways in which those can all kind of add up. So part of it is just trying to have something simplified. And then, of course, when you are using multiple third parties, we have some great partners that do keep things very, very simplistic, but we do run into situations where you may have to adopt multiple software platforms, and that can become more complex just from the standpoint of simplicity. And so we're just trying to look at how we can really streamline that and make it a little bit easier. So obviously part of that comes with the actual tool set. And I think that this is fairly straightforward for those pastors that may be in the room today. If you've gone to any executive pastor conference, these are some of the things that get discussed. How do we have better tools to track what's going on with our donors? How do we get a pulse check, a generosity health report, if you will, so we have better insights into what's actually happening with those donations? Having pastoral care dashboards right at your fingertips, right? That's been something that's been requested and mentioned as a ministerial need. And of course, going back to what we had said before with the fees, actually fully integrated tools. So again, there are some great third parties that can provide really good analytics to help with these tools. And we're not necessarily trying to replace those, but we do want to provide some simplicity that can get you really good data right out of the box. All right, so just to kind of recap, when we talk simplicity with TouchPoint Giving specifically, no third party, right? We're handling it all under our umbrella. The support team that I would say that I know and love, and hopefully you know and love as well, will continue to be your support team. So the TouchPoint support team is going to be able to provide the same level of service for what we are still doing with TouchPoint Giving. And then, of course, with the contract, it's simplified because it's part of your TouchPoint engagement. And then, of course, because we are not having to push data back and forth between multiple systems, it's built directly into TouchPoint. That does just allow for cleaner data across the board. All right, so let's talk about the solution itself. And as we dig in, where I'd like to start is just talking about that we have kind of a release, if you will, a phased approach of how TouchPoint Giving is actually being delivered. So the first thing and the great news that I want to share with everybody is phase one, which I'll share about here in a minute, is live. It is actually in production. We have our first churches that have began the process to roll it out, have actually started to accept donations. So when I talk about phase one, what I really want to just clarify is, as of today, you can start with TouchPoint Giving and you can accept donations. You get to use the great TouchPoint interface for one-time recurring giving, all the things that you would need to actually accept your donations. We are doing a phase two approach that's going to be coming. I'm going to leave that up to guys like Chris Dolan to give specifics, because we always know we don't ever want to overpromise and underdeliver. But we are making solid progress for a phase two approach, and we'll provide more data as we get closer when this will come. But the phase two approach is going to be providing some robust dashboards, and we'll take a look at that. So what you can expect: simplified fee structure, robust dashboards, streamlined and integrated process. And one thing that I'll cover at the end here, it's one feature, but I get incredibly excited about this feature. It's called Card Updater, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Okay, so let's talk about phase two. These are some items that are going to be coming. And I want to give a full disclosure here, as you can see in the very small text under that graphic, that these are mock-ups. These are not the final product, but this is what you can expect. And this is being delivered based off of what Give has been providing churches for several years. But these are dashboards that's going to give your church more insights, higher level data, detailed data at your fingertips within TouchPoint Giving. So I do want to stress and just make sure everyone is aware, these are specific for TouchPoint Giving only. So I just want you to be aware. You still have all the great reporting tools already built within TouchPoint that you experience today. If you're using a third party, they may have some tools as well, but these are things that we're going to have right out of the box with TouchPoint Giving. So as you can see on this first graphic, the one that I want to display, this is one of my favorite tools. This is a tool called our retrospective report. And what it's really doing is it's giving you the ability to go in and look at different periods of time. You know, maybe in this example, it's month to month, but maybe I want to look and see what we were doing Easter last year versus Easter this year. And I want to see, you know, have we seen increases? Have we seen decreases? And what we're trying to provide is showing you totals between your different types of gifts, giving you insights into if you are up or down on within that time frame that you're comparing. And this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's quite a few of additional reports that are tied into this that are allowing you to drill into details that are a little bit more specific. And as you can see here in the bullet points on the left, all that data is in real time. We want your pastors to be able to take immediate action with this data, and we'll provide more examples of that. So as we're looking at this page here, just trying to provide a few more examples of, again, what you can kind of see coming. So looking at trends, in this case, inconsistent giving. Let's look at those donors who gave in that first time period, but didn't actually give in the next time period, or vice versa. So we can start looking at different trends that we may need to dig into in a little bit more detail. Or maybe what we want to do is we want to do a health checkup. Michael had brought a great example when he so kindly reassured me that I'm not going to lose my job, that there's going to be situations where we don't want to call somebody and tap on the shoulder because we realize that they stopped giving. And so we call them and say, hey, Michael, why did you stop giving? But just like he said, what if that uncovers the reality that somebody lost their job, that they're going through a divorce, that some really big life event is happening that we may not have uncovered from other pastoral care attempts, just because that couple or that individual didn't really want to talk about it. And this gives us opportunities to be proactive. So whether it's looking at trends for increased giving, decreased giving, lapse giving, right? That family that's been faithfully giving for 20 years that all of a sudden drops off, that could be a yellow flag that maybe something else is going on. You know, maybe they're thinking about not going to the church anymore. So we just really want to provide those opportunities to really help with overall pastoral care. And that's where the health checkups can come in really well. We're going to provide a lot of one-click analytics that literally I hit the dashboard and it's going to pop up a bunch of different information. I want to look at ranges. I want to look at different time periods. I want to see, hey, here's those that are giving, you know, $0 to $1,000 a month. Here are donors that are giving over 10,000. Here's our top donors, right? Being able to have all that data at your fingertips and then action that data can be super helpful. I know a lot of churches, you know, they may do different campaigns with their top donors. And so being able to quickly get that list, push out some communication to those donors, just like you experience in the communication tools in TouchPoint today, are just going to be some further benefits that do exist. And then, as I mentioned, I get kind of fired up about this one. Even though it's one feature, I think it's worth noting. Let's kind of just paint this picture here. I'm guessing for those of you that are on the finance team in this room, you get some sort of report, or you can, you know, pull up data to discover those whose credit cards have expired within the system. And you may get an email notification. You may have to pull that data up. But the reality is, when that happens, that presents an opportunity for missed donations, right? Especially for our recurring donors. If they're giving a certain amount every month, that card expires. It may take them 2 months. It may take them 3 months before they get around to updating the credit card in the system. So one of the things that we're able to provide within TouchPoint Giving is a great tool called Card Updater. And what it's doing is actually working directly with the credit card companies, that when your card expires and you get a new one, that it's actually in the background automating without the need for your donors to have to go back and update that information. I've actually talked to some churches that have the statistics on some missed donations from expired cards, and it can be actually fairly staggering when you have a large amount of donations on what can be missed in any given month just from expired credit cards. So super great feature that can just help just recoup some of those potential lost gifts. All right. So I know we've talked about a good amount. I just want to recap a few different things here before we jump in. We wanted to leave a good amount of time for Q&A today, because I know we've had a lot of questions and we want to be able to answer those here on our call. So just to recap on what we covered, first of all, again, TouchPoint Giving is live. So if that's something that your church is looking at wanting to get started with, we can literally begin that process today. So if you want to learn more, you can get in touch. In fact, Katie, oh, look at that, Katie. Thank you. Katie has just thrown up a poll. So you are welcome to go ahead and fill out this poll. You can see the first question is just asking if you want us to contact you. The last thing that we want to do is bug you if this isn't something that you're interested in or not a priority right now. But if you would like to learn more, if you'd like to get a demo of seeing the software, go ahead and feel free to check that box, yes, and we'll make sure that our team gets in touch and follows up after this time. Let's see here. Yeah, I guess there's a few other questions there, so feel free to fill that out. And then the last thing I want to do with the recap here is just want to highlight, you still have options. As Michael said at the beginning, as I'll say again, we still have great partners that integrate with TouchPoint, that provide fantastic services. If you're using one of those partners today, you do not have to switch to TouchPoint Giving. So just be rest assured that is not our goal. We are providing the service for those churches that it makes sense for, but you still have options. So just hear us in saying that we still are going to be, honoring those partnerships, and we still have churches that use third parties that don't integrate. And if you still want to do that, that's okay too. Just note that this isn't a one option scenario by any means. All right. So at that point, we're going to go ahead and just open it up for some questions. So maybe Michael, you have a great dad joke that you can throw back to me, so I don't feel as embarrassed.
I just wanted to, I did feel compelled to follow up on our conversation earlier when you were asking about brushing your teeth. You shouldn't use your left hand. A toothbrush just works better.
Got it. That was bad enough that I feel so much better now at the ones that I did earlier. Oh, wow.
All right.
It looks like we do have some questions starting to funnel in here. As much as I know everybody loves our dad jokes, I'm going to go ahead and start answering some of these questions.
Yeah, until y'all tell us otherwise, we're assuming you're laughing on your end like hysterically. So there you go.
It's probably a good thing that we can't see and hear.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, let's answer questions.
All right. So first question, let's see here. And sorry, I'm looking at two screens here, everybody. Okay, does the card updater include updating in cases of reissued cards for fraud or simply expiring cards? That's a great question. We'll probably need to get a little bit of clarity on the specifics, because I do believe there are a few instances where it may not be updated. And obviously, as we're talking about fraud in particular, I do know that there are certain PCI compliance regulations that we have to abide by with processing. So that's a great question that I honestly don't know the specifics on what would be excluded, but we can get those answers. And if your team is wanting to dive in and explore TouchPoint Giving, we'll make sure that we have all those specifics for you to know what the potential exceptions could be.
And then, if you don't mind, I'm going to answer this one about moving recurring givers over. So the question is, will migrating from MyWell, or any system for that matter, require all current recurring donors to set up a new account? So the answer is yes. But what I want to also emphasize is our consulting team is very well versed in best practices around that messaging. So Andrew and Adam and Mike and their team, one of the things that they'll encourage you to do is to start a 3-4 month messaging process where you're saying, hey, everyone, we found, a better way to do things, or a way that's going to really help us advance ministry. So we are going to be changing payment processors. No one has to do anything today. Nobody. We just wanted to prepare you, make you aware. But if you're one of those, early birds and you want to go ahead and do something, here's the link if you want to go ahead and get it started. And then a month later, you repeat it. A month later, you repeat it. And by the time you get to month 3 or 4, you have so many people moved over that those who haven't moved over, we have some strategies on how you can actually help move them over yourself. And then B, at the end of the day, our goal is, and has always turned out to be, that you end up with a higher number of recurring givers because of the fact that it's been messaged over a 4-month window. And those who weren't recurring givers start saying, you know what, maybe I should do that as well. So it's to keep those you have and add new ones. And at the end of the day, you should have a net positive result.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to keep going here. Are the new health check reports available within current processors? So depending on who you're using, that's something that you can ask your current processor, but those types of reports are not available out of the box in TouchPoint today from connecting to those processors. Those reports, all those kind of charts and graphs that I showed, those will be TouchPoint Giving specific types of tools that, again, we are bringing over from the Give platform.
And then we have a couple of questions logically asking about fees. And we would be happy to take that offline and talk about it, because there are just so many things that go into it. To throw anything out right now would be irresponsible. We don't have the data that we would need as it relates to your church. But yeah, we are more than happy to have those conversations with you. I would just say, as a general rule of thumb, I know some of you are on MyWell. I don't think anyone's going to compete with MyWell ever. That's just, they're the least expensive option. So if you're hearing from us that we're going to be less expensive than MyWell, then we are doing a poor job of our messaging. That's not the message we want to communicate. But when you look at everybody else in the market, I would say that you're going to probably find yourself in at least a competitive, if not better position, because like I said, the transaction fees themselves are pretty across the board standard, but the monthly fees don't exist. So right then and there, you end up in a better position. But yeah, we'd be happy to get specific with you.
Yep.
Will you settle out every day or once a week? Eric?
Yeah, great question. So as far as settlements go, how it's going to work is you are going to have basically all of your online giving that's coming through. For those of you that are on the finance team that live in the bundles and the contribution section within TouchPoint, all that's going to automatically populate within those contribution fields. So you'll have basically, you can kind of think about them as, we use the term bundle, but think about them as, daily bundles or daily buckets, where all those gifts, will reside from that day. And of course, settlement periods, when we talk about, the time for settlement, there's a difference between live transactions and actual settlement, right? It's going to take a day or two for your cards to settle, may take a little bit more for ACH, but we have the tools that are built in that'll show you, here's your totals, here's your settlement amount, so that when you are actually looking at that, you're matching it up, it's showing as appropriate for exactly what landed in your bank account. All right.
I think that covers it. Am I missing one? I want to be sure I'm not cutting us off early. Let's see here. Will check returns reflect properly in TouchPoint and Give?
Yes, Debbie, they will. And just to that point, when we talk about returns, when we talk about any refunds, you have the ability to actually execute that directly out of TouchPoint. And so when we get on to as far as the specifics go, I know we can't really show you on today because we're not actually in the TouchPoint software, but again, we're happy to provide those software demonstrations so we can show you more of what to expect on those specifics.
So I've got one for you, Eric. I don't know if you'll have this, or we might actually need to lean on Will to answer this one. Will the batches still batch like they do in the reconcile report currently?
Let's see here. Let me look at this. As far as if I'm understanding correct, and Will, if you need to jump in and tell me I'm wrong, feel free. But I'm just making sure I understand the question correctly. If we're talking about the reconciliation report, that's actually giving you you details on your settlements by fund, that shouldn't change. The only change being that when you're creating, specific bundles for like cash and check, you have the ability to edit those bundles, make changes to those bundles, where with all your online giving, that's being added to a bundle automatically, right? Because it's all coming in through your online gifts. So if we're talking about, trying to have that within the same bundle as your cash and check, that may be where Will may need to provide a little bit more expertise. But as far as the reconciliation reports go, what shouldn't change is the data is still existing in the contribution fields. So those reconciliation reports should be able to pull the same way. Yep. So it looks like the question is the batches in the reconcile report will match what those of the bank. Yeah. So that's not going to change because again, we're talking settlements rather than transactions. When we talk about what's actually settled from online giving, that's what's going to be what's matching up in your bank report. So when you run a reconciliation report that ties settlements, not transactions, then that's going to match up accordingly. Okay. I think that's it. Michael, am I missing any?
No, I think that covers all of them. So I do want to thank everybody. I also want to ask for a little bit of support because I just recently started a professional hide and seek team. Doesn't seem like it's working out. It turns out that good players are hard to find. So any prayer would be appreciated. And we will see you guys next month on that note.